Did you know there was a man so powerful that his enemies feared him more than any army? He was known not only for his immense strength, but also for the impact of his actions. This man, chosen by God, had a special mission: to liberate his people from oppression. His name was Samson, and his story is filled with courage, drama, and redemption. Even before his birth, Samson had a predetermined destiny, consecrated as a Nazirite to fulfill divine plans. His strength was legendary, capable of unimaginable feats that terrified his enemies. But, like any human being, he was flawed and faced difficult and painful choices. Betrayed by those he trusted and humiliated to the extreme, Samson experienced moments of profound downfall. Nevertheless, his journey was not only marked by defeats. In his final act, he managed to reverse his destiny and change the history of an entire nation. His inner strength and determination prove that even in the darkest moments, there is room for redemption. Today, you will get to know the incredible story of Samson, a man called to be a liberator. But before diving into this epic tale, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this and reach more people. Are you ready for this journey? Then, let's begin. Samson was a man anointed by God, separated from birth for a special mission. He was a Nazirite, consecrated to live according to divine precepts, and his superhuman strength was a sign of his connection with God. Chosen to deliver Israel from the Philistines, Samson was an instrument of divine purpose amidst the oppression of his people. His strength was legendary, allowing him to defeat entire armies and perform incredible feats, such as killing a lion with his own hands. The Philistines feared him as an invincible enemy, someone capable of thwarting their most elaborate plans. Even alone, Samson fought like an army, instilling fear in his adversaries. However, despite being powerful, he was human and faced emotional and spiritual weaknesses. His impulsive personality led him to act out of desire or anger, which often complicated his path. The Philistines, realizing this, sought ways to manipulate him and neutralize his strength. It was in his relationships that he encountered the greatest trials, especially with Delilah. Through calculated betrayal, Delilah discovered the secret of his strength: his hair, which had never been cut. After betraying him and delivering it to the Philistines, Samson was captured, blinded, and reduced to humiliation, forced to work as a slave. Even in his weakness, Samson did not entirely lose his faith. He cried out to God in his final moment, asking for strength to fulfill his purpose. In an act of sacrifice, he brought down the pillars of a Philistine temple, destroying his enemies and surrendering his life. The story of Samson is a narrative of physical strength, human failings, and spiritual redemption. It shows that even when we fall, God can still accomplish great things through us. His legacy is a reminder that divine purpose is not hindered by our limitations. Even the greatest heroes have their weaknesses, and Samson was no exception. Despite his extraordinary strength, he was vulnerable to the traps of the heart. And it was Delilah, a woman of striking beauty and impressive cunning, who led him to his downfall. Delilah entered his life like an irresistible seduction, but her intentions were far from innocent. Manipulated by the Philistines, she was paid to discover the secret of Samson's strength. With persistence and charm, Delilah managed to weaken Samson's resistance, who, blinded by his feelings, ended up trusting her. After much insistence, he revealed his secret. His strength was linked to the Nazirite vow, symbolized by the hair that had never been cut. It was the information Delilah needed to betray him. While he slept, she delivered him to the Philistines, who cut his hair, taking away from him the supernatural strength they so feared. This betrayal marked the beginning of Samson's most difficult moment in life. Captured and humiliated, he was taken by the Philistines, who blinded him and put him to work as a slave. However, Samson's story does not end with his downfall, for even in his weakness, he found strength to fulfill his ultimate destiny. To understand Samson, one must go back in time and understand the context of his life. Israel was living through a dark period, under the cruel rule of the Philistines, an enemy nation that oppressed God's people. The oppression was relentless, and the Israelites cried out for help. It was in this desperate scenario that God, in His mercy, promised a liberator for Israel. This liberator would be Samson, a man chosen even before his birth. His story begins miraculously, with a divine announcement made by an angel. The angel appeared to Manoah and his wife, a woman who had been barren until then, to declare the arrival of a son. He would be consecrated as a Nazirite, a servant dedicated to God from the womb. Among the rules of the Nazirite vow, Samson could never cut his hair, drink wine, or touch anything impure. This promise filled the hearts of his parents and all the people of Israel with hope. From a young age, Samson demonstrated that he was special, carrying a purpose greater than himself. His superhuman strength was a clear sign of God's Spirit working through him. Over time, Samson began to confront the Philistines in an impressive way. He defeated Israel's enemies alone, being feared like a whole army. But Samson's journey would be marked by internal conflicts and questionable choices. Although he was a man of God, he was also human, subject to weaknesses and temptations. His decisions, often impulsive, placed him in complicated situations. Despite this, God continued to use him to fulfill His plan. Samson's life shows that even in times of darkness, God can raise someone to bring light. He was a strong liberator, but also a man with deep personal struggles. His story, from his miraculous birth to his heroic deeds, is a testament to God's power and grace. From before his birth, Samson was chosen by God for a special mission. He was consecrated as a Nazirite, someone set apart to serve the Lord in a unique way. This consecration included following strict rules which symbolized his total dedication to God. Among these rules, Samson could never cut his hair, as it was the visible sign of his covenant with God. Furthermore, he was not permitted to consume alcohol or touch impure things, so that he would remain pure and holy before the Lord. These restrictions were not only symbolic, but also spiritual, marking him as a divine instrument. Samson's extraordinary strength was the greatest testimony to God's favor upon his life. It was a strength beyond the natural, capable of performing feats that terrified his enemies and amazed his people. This strength was not only physical, but also a reminder of the divine purpose for which he had been set apart. Through Samson, God demonstrated that even in times of oppression, He had not abandoned His people. Samson's life from the beginning reflected God's sovereignty and His plan to use human instruments, despite their limitations, to fulfill His greater purposes. Samson grew up and soon distinguished himself as the strongest man the world had ever known. His strength was unparalleled, and he became a legendary figure in Israel. From a young age, he demonstrated extraordinary feats, always challenging the limits of human capacity. With each display of his strength, Samson showed that his ability was not natural, but a divine gift. One of the first signs of his strength occurred when he confronted a ferocious lion that attacked him. Without any weapon, he tore it apart with his own hands, as if it were a simple animal. This impressive feat made it clear that his strength came directly from God and not from himself, making him a symbol of divine intervention. Furthermore, Samson faced entire armies alone, without fear of his enemies. He became a true force of nature, and the Philistines, fearful of his strength, tried to find ways to defeat him. His feats were not limited to battles against small groups, but involved confrontations with armed forces that he defeated with ease. One of Samson's most famous feats was the day he defeated 1,000 Philistine soldiers using only the jawbone of a donkey. This act of bravery not only demoralized his enemies, but also served as a clear sign that, with God by his side, no force could defeat him. Each victory of Samson was a testament to his divine calling and his ability to fight for God's promises to the people of Israel. Even the strongest of men, like Samson, can fall prey to their own weaknesses. Samson's physical strength was unmatched, but his emotional vulnerability made him susceptible to poor decisions. His infatuation with women who did not share his faith was the first step toward his downfall. Although chosen by God for a divine mission, Samson allowed himself to be consumed by desires that led him away from his purpose. He fell in love with Philistine women, enemies of Israel, which was already a transgression against his consecration as a Nazirite. However, it was Delilah that Samson found his greatest weakness. Delilah, with her beauty and cunning, entered Samson's life in a captivating way. She not only captured his heart, but also allied herself with the Philistines, who paid her to discover the secret of Samson's strength. Unaware of the trap, he surrendered to her, finally revealing the secret of his supernatural strength, his uncut hair. This revelation marked the beginning of his ruin. Delilah, betraying his trust, revealed the secret to the Philistines, who captured, blinded, and humiliated him. The passion and trust Samson placed in Delilah, a woman who did not share his faith, ultimately led him to lose everything he had, including his strength. Delilah pressured Samson day after day, with her persistent questions and false promises of affection. She desperately wanted to discover the secret of his strength, and it was with cunning that she managed to shake Samson's confidence. Initially, he resisted, but over time his emotional vulnerability and Delilah's manipulation weakened him. She persisted, and Samson increasingly found himself powerless against her insistence. Finally, after much pressure, Samson revealed to Delilah the secret of his strength. It came from God and was symbolically linked to his hair, which had never been cut, as part of his Nazirite vow. He believed that his strength lay in his dedication to the Lord, and that as long as he remained faithful to this vow, nothing could defeat him. Without knowing that this revelation would be his downfall, he entrusted the secret to Delilah. With this information in hand, Delilah immediately betrayed Samson's trust. She sent the Philistines, who had bribed her to discover the secret, and while Samson slept, she had his hair cut. When he awoke, Samson did not realize that he had lost the divine strength that accompanied him and believed he could still act as before. However, when he tried to rise to face his enemies, he discovered that his strength had vanished. Without his power, Samson was easily captured by the Philistines, who blinded and humiliated him, making him a prisoner. Delilah's betrayal, whom he trusted more than God, led to the loss of his strength, his freedom, and his dignity. Without his strength, Samson was humbled in an indescribable way. Blindfolded by the Philistines, he was imprisoned and reduced to a slave, forced to work in a prison, grinding grain in a mill. This was the lowest point of his life, where he, the man who had once defeated armies, was now nothing more than an impotent prisoner. His fall was so great that there seemed to be no more hope for him or for the people of Israel. However, it was precisely in this moment of darkness and humiliation that Samson began to rediscover something more powerful than his physical strength: true faith. While imprisoned and alone, he reflected on his choices and God's purpose for his life. The pain and loss led him to turn to God with a repentant heart and renewed faith, seeking the strength that only the Lord could give him. Samson then prayed to God, begging for strength to accomplish one final mission: to defeat the Philistines and avenge the oppression his people suffered. He did not ask for personal revenge, but for justice and the fulfillment of God's plan for Israel's liberation. This moment of faith was decisive, for Samson, now blind and stripped of his former strength, completely trusted God for his final mission. Samson's true strength, then, was no longer in his body or his physical power, but in complete trust in God. In the end, when he destroyed the temple of the Philistines, sacrificing his life to defeat his enemies, he demonstrated that faith in God can be more powerful than any human strength. Samson's story ends with a triumph of faith over human weakness, reminding us that even in our darkest moments, God can use us to fulfill his purpose. While imprisoned, something remarkable began to happen. Samson's hair began to grow again. This simple fact was a sign of renewal, not only of his physical strength, but also of his hope. Although he had been humiliated and reduced to a life of slavery, Samson was no longer given over to despair. His heart, now more humble, sought restoration, not only of his strength, but of his relationship with God. During this period of reflection and solitude, Samson had time to think about his failings, his choices, and God's purpose for his life. His repentance led him to a profound spiritual renewal. He knew that without God's help he would be unable to accomplish anything, but he also knew that with God's strength, he could still fulfill the mission that had been destined for him from the beginning. It was in this moment of introspection that his faith was restored. Samson then prayed to God sincerely, asking for one last opportunity to fulfill the purpose given to him. He did not ask for personal revenge or for the restoration of his own glory, but for a chance to defeat the Philistines and liberate the people of Israel. His prayer was marked by humility and trust in God's power, recognizing that true strength came from him and not from his own abilities. God heard Samson's prayer and granted him the strength to accomplish one last great deed. His hair, a symbol of his consecration, grew again, as did his faith and trust in the Lord. He was ready to, even in his weakness, be used by God to fulfill his purpose. This moment of renewed faith was the turning point in Samson's life, preparing him for his final great mission. In an act of profound faith and total trust in God, Samson was able to accomplish the impossible. Even without sight and aware of his human limitations, he used the divine strength that had been restored to him to fulfill his final mission. Guided by a young man, he was led to the temple of Dagon, where the Philistines celebrated and gathered to offer sacrifices to their gods. Samson, in his final prayer, asked God to grant him one last surge of strength so that he could fulfill his purpose. God then strengthened him, and with his hands, Samson approached the columns that supported the temple. In a decisive move and with all his strength, he pushed the columns, causing the temple to collapse on himself and on the thousands of Philistines who were inside, including their leaders. The impact was devastating. The temple fell, killing a large number of Philistines and destroying their leadership once and for all. Although Samson had sacrificed his own life in this act, he ensured freedom for the people of Israel, fulfilling the mission for which God had called him. His death, far from being a defeat, was the greatest victory of his life, for through his sacrifice, the oppression of the Philistines over Israel was finally broken. This final act of Samson was a testament to the strength of God, who used a flawed man to accomplish great things. His faith, more than his physical strength, was what enabled his ultimate victory. Samson sacrificed his life, but in doing so, he ensured that the people of Israel were freed from oppression and that God's justice was restored. And this was the incredible story of Samson, a man whose strength came from his direct connection with God. His life was marked by great victories and also by human failings, but in the end, he fulfilled his purpose by trusting in God, even in his weakness. Samson's story teaches us powerful lessons about purpose, faith, and redemption. First, we can learn that the purpose of our lives often goes beyond our human strength. Samson was chosen by God to liberate Israel, but it was only when he turned completely to God in his moment of weakness that he was able to fulfill his mission. This reminds us that our greatest challenges can become opportunities to experience God's power. Samson's faith is also an example of how true strength comes when we surrender to God. Even when it seemed that everything was lost, Samson renewed his faith and sought a final opportunity to serve God. This teaches us that even in the most difficult situations, our faith can give us the strength needed to overcome. Finally, Samson's story speaks to us about redemption. Although he failed in several areas of his life, the final moment of faith and sacrifice was enough to fulfill God's purpose and bring liberation to his people. This shows us that, regardless of the mistakes we make, there is always a chance for redemption when we turn to God with a sincere heart. Just like Samson, we are all called to live with purpose, faith, and to seek redemption, remembering that even in our weaknesses, God can use us to accomplish great things. What we can learn from this story is that with God by our side, nothing is impossible. If you liked this story, leave a like on the video. This helps spread this inspiring message to even more people. Don't forget to share with your friends and family. The more people who know these epic stories, the more quality content we can create for you. If you are not already subscribed, subscribe to the channel. This way you won't miss any of the amazing videos we've prepared with so much care. Turn on the notification bell to be the first to know when new videos are posted. This way, you'll stay up to date on everything. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. See you soon with more incredible stories.